In the eyes of no less an authority than Thomas Jefferson, John Adams was the colossus of independence. Fellow Congressman Richard Stockton of New Jersey believed that Adams was the man to whom the country is most indebted for the great measure of independency. Pennsylvania's Benjamin Rush thought that Adams was equally fearless of men and of the bold assertion of his opinion. This last characteristic, not surprisingly, was something that could test the patience even of Adams's own allies. Benjamin Franklin would write that Adams means well for his country, is always an honest man, often a wise one, but sometimes and in some things absolutely out of his senses. Be that as it may, those of us who enjoy the fruits of American independence in 2026 justifiably can give thanks to God for the single-minded dedication of this most remarkable of Americans. The most important thing I want to tell you about John Adams this evening, though, is that he grew up in the same parish where I did, in a manner of speaking, at least. The parish of St. John the Baptist in Quincy, Massachusetts, was established in 1863, and Adams died almost 40 years before that in 1826. On July 4th, 1826, to be precise, 50 years to the day from the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. And even more amazingly, it was the day that Thomas Jefferson died also. A coincidence that many people in America in 1826 saw as a sure sign of the divine favor that rested on this young republic. And of course, Adams was not a Catholic. He was a Congregationalist. But the New England farmhouse where he was born, and the farmhouse right next to that one where he lived with Abigail and their children, including John Quincy Adams, during the momentous years of the American Revolution, still are standing there today, still nestled up against what used to be known as the Plymouth to Boston Road, and now is known appropriately enough as Independence Avenue, just around the corner from St. John's Catholic Church. Right by a Dunkin' Donuts also, but that probably just goes without saying. Like many of his 18th century contemporaries, especially in New England, John Adams was no admirer of the Catholic Church. I tend to think, though, that he would see the presence of a Catholic church near land which used to be part of his old farm as a sign of the great hope of religious liberty held out in this new nation that he did so much to create. I am quite certain that he would be surprised to learn that the principles of natural law, which served as his own intellectual bedrock, also are embedded within the social teaching of the Catholic Church today. And without a doubt, he would be absolutely astonished to know that here in the 21st century, the most celebrated defender of those principles in the entire world is none other than the Pope. We'll come back to that in a little bit. The men who made up the Second Continental Congress were a motley lot when it came to religion. They were Anglicans, Congregationalists, Presbyterians, Quakers, Deists, and one lone Catholic, Maryland's Charles Carroll of Carrollton, as he would distinctively sign his name on the Declaration. King George, you know where to find me. The religious diversity of this group is something that we rarely take note of today, but it was a truly amazing thing in 1776. In the 250 years leading up to the American Revolution, wars of religion in Europe had resulted in the deaths of millions of people. Nevertheless, the members of the Second Continental Congress, a revolutionary assembly in more ways than one, were able to find common ground, find communion, so to speak, in the existence of certain self-evident truths, including, of course, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words are incredibly familiar to us. We could recite them in our sleep. But that very familiarity also makes it harder for us to remember just how revolutionary those words really were in 1776. The delegates to the Second Continental Congress might have declared independence in just one sentence, one declaratory sentence to be precise. But instead, to justify the momentous step that they were taking, they pointed to unchanging and universally applicable principles, and they expressly affirmed that human rights come not from any earthly king or power, but from God. As Pope John Paul II said in Baltimore in 1995, the Declaration of Independence embodies the unchanging principles of the natural law, whose permanent truth and validity can be known by reason, for it is the law written by God in human hearts. Thus, the Pope went on, the Declaration is a bulwark for the principles of morality which are the very foundations of our democratic system. In short, in this new nation, it would be right that makes might. Why is it that modern popes, including those who are saints no less, speak so approvingly of our American Declaration of Independence? The answer to that question lies in the body of teaching that we know as Catholic social teaching or Catholic social doctrine. This teaching, which has been called the Church's best-kept secret, is made up of the documents of the Second Vatican Council and writings of the popes since Pope Leo XIII, the previous Leo, 135 years ago, addressing how we are to shine the light of the gospel into every corner of modern society. The twin pillars of this teaching are human dignity and the common good. Of course, every citizen who wants to be faithful to the principles of the Declaration has the duty of advancing human dignity and the common good. We who are Catholic citizens, however, have an even higher responsibility to carry out that work, because the Eucharist that we share tells us of the transcendent destiny of the human race, and most importantly, of the limitless love of the Lord Jesus Christ. Love is the whole point of Catholic social teaching. Love is why the Church offers this teaching to the world. Pope Leo's new encyclical, Magnificat Humanitas, which calls for the defense of the human person in an age of threats to human dignity and the common good, coming from things like artificial intelligence and war, is an outstanding example of what Catholic social teaching is trying to accomplish. I would encourage you all to read that encyclical, all 42,000 words. Why is it, though, that this religious teaching has a place in the secular public square? The answer to that question is critically important. And here's the answer. It's because Catholic social teaching is based not just on faith and revelation, but also on reason and natural law. Catholic social teaching is Catholic both with a capital C and a small c, Catholic meaning universal. And so Catholic social teaching can be directed and is directed to believers and non-believers alike. One doesn't need to be Catholic, for example, to believe that it is wrong to kill someone, or that we should take care of people in need, or, just to pull something out of the air, that all people are created equal. The common good is a religious principle, but it is also one of the foundation stones of the body politic. It says so right in the preamble to the United States Constitution, which speaks about the promotion of the general welfare. And it says it in Part 1, Article 1 of our own New Hampshire Constitution, which says that government is instituted for the general good. Thus, when we bring the principles of Catholic social teaching into the American public square, we're not speaking in some strange foreign language. We're actually speaking in a language that would have been exceedingly familiar to John Adams and the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. In fact, if we can agree that three of the most prominent characteristics of national political culture as it has evolved in the 21st century are radical individualism, the pursuit of self-interest, and the principle of might makes right, then it is that political culture and not Catholic social teaching which would be unintelligible to the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. They would regard this modern culture as the alien dialect that they would have a hard time to understand. So in bringing Catholic social teaching into the American public square, we are really calling the American body politic back to the principles of the Declaration of Independence. We're calling the American body politic back to the better angels of its own nature. The man who famously first spoke about the better angels of our nature, of course, was Abraham Lincoln in his first inaugural address. If John Adams was the prime mover behind American independence, it would be Lincoln who would become the definitive interpreter of the Declaration. In February of 1860, less than 2 weeks before he was inaugurated as president, Lincoln told a crowd in Philadelphia that I have never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence. Lincoln recognized that what makes us unique as a nation is that we are formed not around a particular race or ethnicity or religious background, but rather around a set of unchanging principles that we hold on to in common. During the Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858, Lincoln had this to say about new immigrants to the United States. If they look back to trace their connection with the Revolution by blood, they find they have none. But when they look through that old Declaration of Independence, they find that those old men say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And then they feel that that moral sentiment taught in that day evidences their relation to those men, and that they have a right to claim it as though they were blood of the blood and flesh of the flesh of the men who wrote that declaration, and so they are. It would be Lincoln, as the commander-in-chief of the Union armies in the Civil War, who would come to grasp, perhaps more deeply than any American ever has, that in order for the Declaration's principles to endure, each succeeding generation of Americans must be profoundly committed to defending them. In the Gettysburg Address in November of 1863, Lincoln recalled that the founding generation had produced a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. From that premise, he would go on to define the Civil War as a test of whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Lincoln's question has lost none of its urgency over the course of the past 163 years. In Washington in 2008, Pope Benedict XVI called us to remember that freedom is not only a gift, but also a summons to personal responsibility. It is a challenge held out to each generation, and it must constantly be won over for the cause of good. And this is why John Adams and I have more in common than that we are sons of Quincy who grew up to be lawyers. Whether our ancestors were English Puritans who first arrived on these shores in the 17th century, or Irish Catholics who did not come over until 3 centuries later, both of us, all of us, have inherited the job as faithful citizens of advancing the principles announced in the Declaration of Independence, to promote human dignity and the common good, to safeguard the notion that it is right that makes might, and to ensure that we really are one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. Because 250 years on, the American Revolution is still up for grabs. It always will be. And how the story turns out is up to each one of us. Thank you.